Think about the last time you lost your temper. Not a small frustration, a real moment of anger. Now ask yourself honestly, was the reaction proportional to what caused it? Or was it bigger, significantly bigger than the situation seemed to deserve? If the answer is yes, Seneca identified exactly what was happening in that moment. 2,000 years ago, in a text called De Ira on anger. And his conclusion was this: the anger you feel is never about what triggered it. Never. It is always about something underneath. Something older. Something more personal. Something the trigger merely unlocked. And until you know what that something is, the anger will keep returning. Dressed in different clothes. Caused by different people. But always the same thing underneath. This is what Seneca found. And it changes everything about how you handle it. Before we go into this, if you watched the Seneca video on time last week, this one goes deeper into the same system. Subscribe now and hit the bell, because what we are building here, philosopher by philosopher, human problem by human problem, is a library of ancient solutions that most people never find. Subscribe. 5 seconds. Now, let us get into what anger is actually hiding. Welcome to Memento, Sapiens, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. Around the year 45 AD, Seneca sat down and wrote what would become the most precise and uncomfortable analysis of anger ever produced in the ancient world. He called it Ira, on anger, 3 books, written to his brother Novatus, not as abstract philosophy, as a personal investigation, because Seneca himself struggled with anger. He wrote that openly, a man who advised emperors, who counseled kings, who wrote on equanimity and peace of mind, admitted that anger was the emotion he found hardest to master, and that admission, that honesty about his own struggle, is what makes the Ira different from everything else written on this subject. He was not describing anger from a distance. He was dissecting it from the inside. What he found across 3 books of meticulous psychological observation is more accurate than most modern psychology and more practical than anything you will find in a self-help book about managing your emotions. Today, I am giving you the complete system, what anger actually is, what is hiding, why it keeps returning, and the 3-stage method Seneca built to stop it before it starts. This is the Ira, simplified, applied, and ready to use. Part 1. What anger actually is, and why the modern definition keeps you stuck. Most people define anger as a reaction. Something happens. You get angry. Cause and effect. Simple. Mechanical. Seneca said this definition is almost completely wrong. And as long as you hold it, you will keep being surprised by your own anger. Here is his definition. Anger is not a reaction. Anger is a judgment. Specifically, it is the judgment that a wrong has been done to you, that it was intentional, and that it deserves punishment. Let me break that down. 3 elements. All 3 must be present for what Seneca calls true anger to occur. Element 1. You perceive a wrong. Not that a wrong objectively occurred, that you perceive one. The same event can produce anger in one person and indifference in another. The event is not the cause. The perception is. Element 2. You judge the wrong as intentional. When someone bumps into you accidentally, most people feel no anger. When someone bumps into you and you think they did it deliberately, the anger appears immediately. Same physical event. The judgment of intent is what produces the emotion. Element 3. You feel the wrong deserves punishment. This is the part Seneca found most important. Anger is not just about what happened. It is about wanting something to happen in return. Correction, justice, pain for pain, the desire to restore what felt violated. Now, here is where Seneca says something that most people resist the first time they hear it. If anger is a judgment, not a reflex, then it is something you participate in, not fully consciously, not with full control. But the anger does not happen to you the way a cold happens to you. There is a moment, however brief, between the trigger and the anger, where a judgment is being formed. And that moment, that gap, is where everything Seneca built becomes useful. Part 1. What anger actually is, and why the modern definition keeps you stuck. Most people define anger as a reaction. Something happens. You get angry. Cause and effect. Simple. Mechanical. Seneca said this definition is almost completely wrong. And as long as you hold it, you will keep being surprised by your own anger. Here is his definition. Anger is not a reaction. Anger is a judgment. Specifically, it is the judgment that a wrong has been done to you, that it was intentional, and that it deserves punishment. Let me break that down. 3 elements. All 3 must be present for what Seneca calls true anger to occur. Element 1. You perceive a wrong. Not that a wrong objectively occurred, that you perceive one. The same event can produce anger in one person and indifference in another. The event is not the cause. The perception is. Element 2. You judge the wrong as intentional. When someone bumps into you accidentally, most people feel no anger. When someone bumps into you and you think they did it deliberately, the anger appears immediately. Same physical event. The judgment of intent is what produces the emotion. Element 3. You feel the wrong deserves punishment. This is the part Seneca found most important. Anger is not just about what happened. It is about wanting something to happen in return. Correction, justice, pain for pain, the desire to restore what felt violated. Now, here is where Seneca says something that most people resist the first time they hear it. If anger is a judgment, not a reflex, then it is something you participate in, not fully consciously, not with full control. But the anger does not happen to you the way a cold happens to you. There is a moment, however brief, between the trigger and the anger, where a judgment is being formed. And that moment, that gap, is where everything Seneca built becomes useful. Part 3. Why anger feels good, and why that is the most dangerous thing about it. Seneca wrote something into Ira that surprised me. The first time I read it, he said, anger is pleasurable, not pleasant, pleasurable. And he meant that precisely. Anger produces a feeling of clarity, a sense of being right, a momentary elimination of ambiguity. When you are angry, you know exactly who is wrong and what should be done about it. That certainty, however temporary, is genuinely relieving. In a life full of complexity and uncertainty, the simplicity of righteous anger feels like solid ground. Seneca also noted that anger produces a feeling of energy, the physiological experience of anger, the adrenaline, the heightened alertness, feels like power, like the opposite of helplessness. And for people who spend most of their time feeling like things happen to them rather than because of them, that feeling of power, even briefly, even destructively, is hard to give up. This is why Seneca said anger is habit forming, not in the chemical sense, in the psychological sense. The person who discovers early in life that anger produces results, attention, compliance, the retreat of threat, learns to reach for anger the way others reach for other tools. Not because they are bad, because it worked once and then worked again until it became the default response to anything that felt threatening or uncertain. And here is where Seneca's observation becomes most uncomfortable. The chronic anger, the low-grade irritability that some people carry through their days is rarely about anything current. It is the residue of old anger that was never resolved, old judgments of wrong that were never corrected, old fear that was never addressed, old grief that was never felt. And that residue, accumulated over years, becomes something Seneca called the most destructive force available to a human being, not because of what it does to others, because of what it does to the person carrying it. He wrote, "Anger has destroyed more of the person who holds it than the person it was directed at. The target of your anger often barely notices. The person who carries the anger is destroyed by it slowly, from the inside." If any of what you just heard felt like a description of something real in your life, subscribe to this channel right now, because what comes next, Seneca's 3-stage method for stopping anger before it starts, is the most practical thing he ever wrote. And it works not as a suppression technique, as a genuine understanding of what you are actually feeling. Subscribe, hit the bell. Now, the method. Part 4. Seneca's 3-stage method, the complete system for stopping anger before it starts. Seneca was clear in Diaira. The goal is not to suppress anger. Suppression does not resolve the judgment underneath. It simply delays the expression of it, and usually increases its pressure. The goal is to understand anger so precisely that it loses its automaticity, to move from "it happens to me" to "I can see what is happening," and participate in what comes next. 3 stages, in sequence. Stage 1, the pause before the response. Seneca wrote that the most important moment in any anger sequence is the moment before you respond to the trigger, not the trigger itself, the moment before the response. He prescribed a specific practice. When you feel the first movement of anger, the physiological signal, the heat, the tightening, do not respond immediately. Wait, not forever, not until the feeling passes, just long enough to ask one question. Is what I am about to do consistent with who I want to be? Not, is my anger justified? That question produces debate. This question produces clarity, because most of the time, in the heat of genuine anger, the action you are about to take is not consistent with who you want to be. And knowing that clearly in that moment changes what you do next. Stage 2, the investigation. This is where Seneca's analysis becomes most useful. Once you have paused, once you are not in the immediate grip of the response, ask the real question, not what caused this anger. What is this anger protecting? Is it fear? What specifically am I afraid of losing? Is it grief? Is there something I have not allowed myself to feel? Is it the self? Did something in this situation touch something I already fear is true about me? Seneca said this investigation, done honestly without defense, almost always reveals that the trigger was not the actual cause. The trigger was an opener, a door that swung open onto something already there. And once you can see what is actually there, the anger changes its character. It becomes information instead of command. Stage 3, the address. This is the stage most approaches skip, and it is the most important one. Once you know what the anger is protecting, address that thing directly. If it is fear, name the fear. Examine whether it is real. Apply what Seneca called premeditatio, the prior contemplation of what you fear, so it loses its power to ambush you. If it is grief, allow the grief, not the anger version of it, the actual grief. The loss itself, felt as loss. Seneca wrote that unexpressed grief is the most reliable source of chronic anger available, and the only resolution is the grief itself, not the anger that covers it. If it is the self, examine the criticism honestly. Is it true? If it is true, it is information. If it is false, it requires no defense. The only thing that requires the defense of anger is something that is partly true and that you are not yet ready to look at. These 3 stages, the pause, the investigation, the address, are the complete Seneca system. Not anger management, Anger understanding. Because the emotion you understand, you no longer need to suppress. You need only to see it clearly. And what you can see clearly, you can choose. Every time. Part 5. Seneca and Nero. The moment the system was tested in real life. Seneca served as advisor to Emperor Nero for approximately 8 years. And Nero, whatever his qualities in the early years, became one of the most erratic, cruel, and dangerous rulers in Roman history. He killed his own mother. He persecuted Christians. He burned sections of Rome. And Seneca, the man who had written the most precise analysis of anger in the ancient world, was required every day to interact with a man who embodied almost everything that Iro warned against. Impulsive, reactive, governed entirely by his emotions, capable of ordering death on a whim. Think about what that required of Seneca's system. Not theoretical anger, real anger, at real injustice, perpetrated by real power, that could not be challenged directly. What did Seneca do? He practiced stage 1, the pause, in every interaction. Historians record that Seneca was consistently calm in Nero's presence, not passive, not fearful, calm in the specific way that comes from someone who has done the investigation, who knows what they feel and why, and has chosen their response rather than reacted into it. He practiced stage 2, the investigation, in his letters to Lucilius. Dozens of those letters deal with the experience of witnessing injustice and cruelty and choosing not to become them. He wrote about the anger he felt. He wrote about what it was protecting, his sense of rightness, his fear of complicity, his grief at what Rome had become. He named it. He examined it. He wrote it down. And stage 3, the address. He addressed his actual fear that he was complicit by writing, by teaching, by leaving what he could in words. For people who would come long after Nero, he addressed his grief at Rome's corruption, not by raging against it, but by building something apart from it. And when Nero finally ordered his death, Seneca did not rage, did not plead, did not collapse. He turned to his friends and said, "Where have the precepts of philosophy gone?" And then demonstrated them. One final time, the system worked, not because it made his circumstances easier, because it made him, in the worst circumstances available, still himself, the person his philosophy had built. That is the only proof that matters. Part 6. What this means for the anger in your life. Specifically, you're not dealing with Nero, but you're dealing with something. A person who keeps triggering you. A situation that produces a reaction that seems larger than it should be. A pattern you have noticed where the same type of situation produces the same outsized response, and you cannot fully explain why. Seneca would say the explanation is not in the situation. It is in what the situation keeps touching. Here is the practice, starting today. The next time you feel the first signal of anger, before you respond, before you speak, before you send the message, before you act on it, ask yourself one question. Not, is this fair? What is this protecting? What fear did this trigger? What loss does it remind me of? What part of myself is this defending? You do not have to resolve the answer immediately. You only have to ask the question honestly. Because the question, asked sincerely, interrupts the automaticity. It inserts the pause that Seneca said is the entire foundation of the system. And in that pause, even a brief one, you stop being the person anger happens to and start being the person who chooses what comes next. That is not the absence of anger. That is something much more valuable. The ability to feel it fully and still decide. That ability, built slowly, practiced imperfectly, returned to after every failure, is what Seneca spent 30 years constructing. Not in vulnerability. The choice. Always the choice. Seneca's complete system on anger in full. What anger actually is: a judgment, not a reflex. 3 elements: a perceived wrong, judged as intentional. That deserves a response. What anger hides: fear of loss, unprocessed grief, the gap between who you think you are and who you fear you might be. Why anger feels good: certainty in uncertainty, energy in helplessness, the illusion of power. The 3-stage method. The pause is what I am about to do, consistent with who I want to be. The investigation. What is this protecting? The address. Go to what the anger was covering. Directly, honestly, without defense. The proof. Seneca applied this system in the most difficult circumstance available, advising a tyrant, and died still himself. That is the standard, not perfection. Yourself, consistently, even under pressure. Now, 2 things before you go. 1, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell, because next week we go to Epictetus, a man who had less than Seneca, who had nothing, in fact, and who built more inner freedom than almost anyone who has ever lived. What he discovered about freedom from a position of total powerlessness is the most remarkable thing in the history of Stoic philosophy. Subscribe. You do not want to miss it. 2, share this video with 1 person. Not the person you are angry at. The person you know who is carrying anger that is too big for what seems to be causing it. They deserve this system, and sending it to them is itself what Seneca called the practice of virtue. Giving something that matters to someone who needs it. Remember to be wise. Memento Sapiens. Trident emblem.